Letters to IDMR presents The Great Migration, unraveling the hidden causes behind the exodus to Los Angeles. Anonymous, August 13, 2024. The Institute of Divine Metaphysical Research experienced a profound and often misunderstood migration beginning around 2008. This migration, which started as a trickle and quickly snowballed, saw dedicated members from across the United States flocking to Southern California, leaving behind their local branches in droves. By the time the full impact was felt, it had reshaped the landscape of the IDMR community, leaving many classes empty and some entirely shuttered. To understand this migration, one must delve into the deeper, less publicized reasons behind this mass movement, a story that has yet to be fully told. The seeds of discontent. At the heart of this migration was Dr. Robert Harris, a man who had once enjoyed immense popularity across IDMR branches nationwide. Wherever he traveled, members would hang on his every word, treating him with the reverence usually reserved for prophets. Yet, back home in Los Angeles, the lecture hall was beginning to empty. Whole rows that had once been filled with eager listeners now stood barren during the week. This decline wasn't just a coincidence, it was the direct result of Harris's failed predictions of the end of the world in 1996, 2000, and again in 2007 and 2010. Each failed prophecy chipped away at the zeal that had once electrified the members, causing many to lose faith and fall away. Harris, desperate to revitalize the dwindling energy in his home base, began to drop subtle hints to the most dedicated ministers and teachers in various classes across the country. He needed them to come to Los Angeles, to breathe life back into the place where his authority and legacy were most visibly at stake. These ministers heeded his call, and they came. In time, Harris began to draw correlations between Los Angeles and the city spoken of in Isaiah 2, where all nations shall flow unto it. He painted a picture of the sons returning home at the end of the age, and the vision was compelling enough to draw many to his side. A snowball effect. What began as a few relocations soon turned into a flood. People from all over the country began announcing their plans to move to Southern California, driven by a mix of religious fervor and a fear of missing out. Over time, it's estimated that nearly 2,000 people abandoned their posts in branches across the nation to come to Southern California. As the numbers swelled, so did the problems. Riverside Drive, the IDMR's headquarters in Los Angeles, simply couldn't accommodate the influx. Lines began to form outside the lecture hall, with members waiting in the heat for up to 2 hours just to get a seat. Inside, the overcrowding became so severe that people were sometimes turned away to avoid violating fire codes that were frequently ignored in the face of this newfound zeal. As Friendship Auditorium on Riverside Drive became increasingly untenable, many of the overflow of members ended up in Banning, California. Banning became another hub for those drawn to Southern California, where the community found new ways to infuse their narrative with significance. In Banning, they began to claim that they represented the children, a symbolic reference to their perceived spiritual role, while their dean, Pat Nelson, was exalted as the bride. These titles and correlations added a layer of mystical importance to their relocation, reinforcing the idea that their move to Southern California was part of a divine plan. The decline of the branches. Yet, while Harris might have been pleased to see the lecture hall packed, this migration had dire consequences for the branches across the country. Many of those who moved to Southern California were the very ministers and teachers who kept their local classes alive. They were the speakers who inspired others, the leaders who paid the rent, and the deans who shepherded their flocks. When Harris was confronted with the damage this migration was doing to the branches, his response was a smirk and a scripture. I robbed other churches, taking wages of them, to do you service. To him, the ends justified the means. The empty chairs in Los Angeles had been filled, and that was what mattered. Many, if not all, branches are now a shadow of their former selves. Some have stopped holding regular classes altogether, relying instead on videotapes of Los Angeles lectures to fill the void. But even this comes with its own set of rigid rules. Members who don't attend or fail to show up in a suit and tie or business attire are labeled as demons. The same goes for those in Los Angeles who dared to complain about the long lines, the lack of seats, or the cramped conditions. Harris, resolute in his decision not to relocate to a larger venue, dismisses such concerns with accusations of demonic influence, as he would proudly march in and take his assigned seat for each class, never suffering the pain and discomforts of the commoners. Some branches were forced into a cottage meeting status due to the precipitous drop in membership following the exodus to Los Angeles. Others were shuttered entirely. Those that remain are now in a perpetual state of being on the outside looking in at headquarters from afar. Many members have been forced to incur incredible travel expenses, as they are encouraged to fly to Los Angeles and Banning as often as possible, some up to 2 to 3 times per year, so that they can feel a part of the school. This has led not only to financial strain on households, but also to further fractured familial relationships, as these members rack up weeks away from home to be in LA. The necessity of these regular pilgrimages was heavily pushed by Harris, Bryant, and Gilkey, who equated them to Roman Catholics going to Rome and Muslims going to Mecca. All serious institutors are thus required to be counted in LA on a regular basis, or risk being labeled as demons. This is particularly tragic, as it represents a gross misrepresentation of their founder, Henry Clifford Kinley, who more accurately said, "The Muslims have Mecca, and the Catholics have Rome. But if you have the Holy Spirit in you, you don't have to go anywhere." This great migration was not just a physical movement, but a seismic shift within the IDMR community. It was an act of self-preservation on the part of many students, who felt the need to be where the action was, to be part of the movement Harris was cultivating in Los Angeles. But in their rush to be at the center of it all, many abandoned their local communities, leaving ill-equipped and unqualified people to take over. There were shepherds who left their flocks to fend for themselves. A social club in disguise. When they arrived in Southern California, many members found more than just a religious mission. They found a social club. What was supposed to be a spiritual journey often turned into a series of extravagant events that resembled Hollywood bashes. Members would coordinate their outfits for picnics and gatherings, including all black and all white events where every detail of their attire had to match the chosen color. The celebrations were nonstop, with members gathering on weeknights, weekends, after class, and even on non-class nights. They simply couldn't get enough of each other and looked for any excuse to celebrate, drink, and be merry. This atmosphere of constant revelry was often justified by the belief that they were getting their inheritance on this side of the veil. Living as though the promised rewards of their faith were already being realized, the gatherings were more than just social events. They were seen as a fulfillment of divine favor, and members reveled in the sense of community and privilege that these events provided. As members settled into this new environment, many began to develop eyes for others in the community. It wasn't just a move to a new location. For some, it was a chance to find a new spouse. Lust and desire quickly took hold, leading to the dissolution of many marriages. Spouses were frequently swapped, sometimes 3 or more times, and it became commonplace to simply look away when someone was seen with a new partner. The rapid changes in relationships made it difficult to keep up with who was dating or married to whom, as it seemed to change frequently. This kind of behavior had long been a part of IDMR's history, but it accelerated dramatically when hundreds of people moved to the same class, expanding the dating pool with numerous new options. Certain peak events, like the annual Banning event held each Christmas to celebrate their officers, became legendary within the community. The Banning event was by invitation only, serving to create a social caste system within the IDMR. Those who received an invitation were considered the who's who of the organization. And people would spend months or even years currying favor with those in power to secure a spot on the attendee list. Being invited to the event was a clear signal of one's elite status within the IDMR, while those left out were subtly reminded of their lower standing. Throughout the year, members would compete to attend the best events and be invited to important people's homes, eager to align themselves with the inner circle. During lectures, those who envied the exclusivity of these gatherings were often berated and reminded that Dr. Harris, Aaron, or Keith never revealed secrets at these meetings, insisting that they said the same things on and off the floor. However, these chastisements did little to deter members from vying heavily to be at gatherings where one of the IDMR royalty would also be present. It became common for those who managed to attend to drop humble hints during their lectures, subtly letting others know that they had been at these exclusive gatherings, an unspoken signal of their importance within the community. The social aspect of this migration highlights a dramatic shift in priorities within the IDMR community, where the appeal of belonging to a dynamic, party-like environment overshadowed the initial spiritual motivations that had once defined the organization. It was less about the teachings and more about the experience, a desire to be where the action was, surrounded by others who shared the same enthusiasm for the lifestyle that had developed in these hubs. Relocatees. As the migration intensified, a bitter frustration began to grow within the Los Angeles branch. The once manageable conditions rapidly deteriorated, and the competition for seats in the lecture hall became fierce. People were angry, and their frustration was palpable. Those who had always lived in LA began to resent the discomfort that the influx of new arrivals, the relocatees, was causing. The term relocatee was coined as a sneer, a derogatory label meant to set the newcomers apart from the original members. Yet, instead of being disheartened, the relocatees wore the moniker proudly. Many of these relocatees were relieved to escape the persecution they had experienced in their home branches, where deans, feeling the sting of Harris's constant attacks on their reputations, had taken out their frustrations on students who preached LA's progressive doctrines. For others, the move to Los Angeles was a welcome escape from the cold winters, and they found solace in the more tempered climate. Some even concocted excuses, claiming that their doctors had recommended the cleaner air of Los Angeles to alleviate their migraines. This thin veil of "it's for my health" served as a convenient cover for abandoning marriages, offices, and other commitments left behind. Over time, the newcomers far outnumbered the original LA members. They began to assert themselves, pushing the longtime residents out of their offices and positions. The takeover was complete. Los Angeles was reborn, transformed by the influx of new blood, and the original members who had once defined the branch found themselves on the periphery of their own community, the Founders Church. After nearly 10 years of overcrowding and complaints, Harris finally capitulated and allowed the class to move to a gorgeous new facility known as the Founders Church, near downtown Los Angeles. Interestingly, the building already bore this name, but the class capitalized on it, correlating the title to Henry Kinley as the founder. This association is laced with irony, given that Kinley had often stated, "I didn't come to build any church," emphasizing that the church is the assembly or body, established from the foundation of the world, and not by any man, not even by H.C. Kinley himself. This move, while solving the practical issues of space, adds another layer of complexity to the narrative, one where the original intent of the IDMR seems increasingly obscured by the decisions of its current leadership. Conclusion. The Great Migration of IDMR members to Southern California beginning in 2008 is a story that reveals much about the inner workings of the organization, the dynamics of power, and the lengths to which leaders will go to maintain their influence. It's a story of ambition, disillusionment, and the human need for connection, a story that should be told, not just as a historical account, but as a cautionary tale for those who may one day find themselves on a similar path. Thank you for watching.